The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under Ethan's door like a ghost from a life he'd tried to bury. Its edges were worn, the handwriting unmistakably Caleb Sharp, defiant, yet trembling with something unspoken. Ethan, now 38, stood frozen in his small Ohio apartment, the weight of 16 years pressing against his chest. He hadn't seen his younger brother since the summer of 2009, when their family's world unraveled. Back then, Ethan was 22, a man of faith, certain he could fix Caleb, who was barely 16 and caught kissing a boy behind the church. Their father, Pastor Daniel Hargrove, had called it a sin, a sickness, and Ethan, desperate to be the good son, had agreed to help cure Caleb through conversion therapy. The memory burned Caleb's tear-streaked face, his pleas ignored, the cold basement room where they'd sent him for weeks of treatment. Ethan had believed he was saving his brother, but now, holding the letter, he saw only the damage he'd caused. Caleb was back in town, out and proud, and he wanted to meet. Ethan sank onto his couch, the letter trembling in his hands. The words blurred as his mind replayed the past, his own voice, sharp and righteous, telling Caleb he could change, that he had to change. The shame of it choked him. He'd spent years running from that summer, moving from job to job, carpenter, mechanic, anything to keep his hands busy and his guilt at bay. But Caleb's return was a reckoning. The diner where they'd agreed to meet was a 10-minute walk from Ethan's apartment. It was the kind of place where time stood still, greasy spoons, cracked vinyl booths, and waitresses who called you hon. Ethan arrived early. His stomach knotted, and took a booth by the window. The late autumn light cast long shadows across the table, and he wondered if Caleb would even show. When the bell above the door jingled, Ethan's heart lurched. Caleb stood there, no longer the scrawny kid Ethan remembered. At 22, he was lean but strong, his dark hair longer, his eyes carrying a fire that hadn't been there before. He wore a leather jacket, a rainbow pin glinting on the collar, and his gaze locked onto Ethan with a mix of defiance and hope. "Ethan," Caleb said, his voice steady but soft, like he was testing the air between them. "Caleb." Ethan stood, awkward, unsure if a hug was welcome. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken history. Caleb slid into the booth, dropping his backpack beside him. The silence was suffocating. "I didn't think you'd come," Ethan finally said, his voice rough. Caleb's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. "Didn't think I would either." The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading Doris, set down 2 coffees without being asked. Ethan gripped his mug like a lifeline. "Your letter. It said you're staying in town." "For now?" Caleb's tone was guarded. "I'm working with a youth group, helping kids like me. Kids who don't have anyone." Ethan flinched. The words weren't meant to cut, but they did. He remembered Caleb at 16, alone in that basement, the family he'd trusted turning against him. Ethan had been part of that betrayal. "I'm sorry," Ethan blurted, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "For everything. For what I did." Caleb's eyes darkened, and he leaned back, arms crossed. "You think sorry fixes it? You think it erases what you and Dad put me through?" "I know it doesn't," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "I was wrong. I thought I was helping you." "You thought you were fixing me," Caleb shot back, his voice low but sharp. "You let them lock me in that place. You stood there while they told me I was broken." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to explain the pressure he'd felt, the fear of defying their father. But excuses felt hollow now. "I was young, Caleb. I didn't know better." "You were my brother," Caleb said, his voice breaking. I needed you." The words landed like a punch. Ethan stared at the table, the coffee growing cold. He'd spent years convincing himself Caleb was fine, that he'd moved on. But the pain in Caleb's eyes told a different story. "I ran away after that summer," Caleb said, his voice quieter now. "Lived on the streets for a while. Got lucky. Found people who cared. But I never stopped wondering why you didn't fight for me." Ethan's chest ached. He hadn't known. Their father had said Caleb was sent to a better program, out of state. And Ethan, drowning in his own guilt, had believed it. He'd never asked questions. "I want to make this right," Ethan said, leaning forward. "I know I can't undo it, but I want to try." Caleb studied him, his expression unreadable. "I didn't come here to forgive you, Ethan. I came because I'm tired of carrying this alone." The bell jingled again, and a group of teenagers walked in, laughing. Caleb's eyes softened as he watched them, and Ethan saw a glimpse of the brother he'd lost, the one who used to sneak him comic books, who laughed at his terrible jokes. "I'm not that kid anymore," Caleb said, turning back to Ethan. "But I'm here. And if you mean what you say, you've got to prove it." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. He didn't know how to start, but he knew he couldn't lose Caleb again. The past was a weight he'd carried too long. And now, with his brother sitting across from him, it was time to face it. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Ethan. Caleb's words echoed in his mind. Prove it. He wanted to God. He wanted to, but where did you even begin to mend a fracture 16 years deep? Caleb sipped his coffee, his eyes scanning the diner as if searching for an escape. Ethan noticed the way his fingers tapped the mug, a nervous habit from childhood that hadn't faded. It was a small thing, but it grounded Ethan, a reminder that this was still his brother, not a stranger. "Tell me about the youth group," Ethan said, desperate to keep the conversation alive. Caleb hesitated, then shrugged. "It's called Haven. We help queer kids runaways. Mostly kids whose families kick them out or who don't feel safe at home. We give them a place to crash, food, someone to talk to." Ethan's stomach twisted. He pictured Caleb at 16, alone, no one to turn to. "How'd you get into that?" "Personal experience," Caleb said dryly, his eyes flicking to Ethan's. "After I left, I bounced around shelters in Chicago. Met a guy, Marcus, who ran a group like Haven. He saved my life. Now I'm paying it forward." Ethan nodded, trying to hide the guilt clawing at him. "Sounds like good work." "It is." Caleb's voice softened, a flicker of pride breaking through. "These kids, they're tough, but they're scared. They need someone who gets it." Ethan wanted to ask more, but the weight of Caleb's past off the role he'd played in it kept him silent. Instead, he said, "I'm proud of you." Caleb's jaw tightened, and he looked away. "Don't. Not yet." The rebuke stung, but Ethan didn't push. He glanced out the window, where the streetlights flickered on, casting the town in a soft glow. This was Millfield, Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your secrets. Growing up, Ethan and Caleb had been the pastor's sons, expected to be perfect. Ethan had leaned into it, while Caleb had always pushed back, his spirit too bright to be contained. "Do you ever think about Dad?" Caleb asked suddenly, his voice low. Ethan stiffened. Their father had died 5 years ago, a heart attack that came too soon, but not soon enough to erase the damage he'd done. "Sometimes. Not fondly." Caleb let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah. Me neither." The silence returned, heavier now. Ethan wanted to ask about Caleb's life, his dreams, the person he'd become. But every question felt like stepping on a minefield. Instead, he said, "I work at the auto shop on Maple now. Been there a couple years." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You? A mechanic? Thought you'd be preaching by now." Ethan winced. "I stopped going to church after you left. Couldn't stomach it." Caleb's expression softened, just for a moment, before hardening again. "Good. That place was poison." Ethan wanted to agree, but the words caught in his throat. He'd spent years unraveling the beliefs he'd been raised with, but the guilt of his role in Caleb's pain was harder to shake. He'd been complicit, a willing participant in their father's crusade to save Caleb. "Do you hate me?" Ethan asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Caleb's eyes met his, and for a moment, Ethan saw the boy he'd known vulnerable, searching. "I did," Caleb said quietly. "For a long time. But hate's heavy. You know. I'm trying to let it go." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I'm glad you're here." Caleb didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. They sat there, two brothers separated by years and mistakes, trying to find a way back to each other. The diner's clock ticked on, marking the seconds of a conversation that was only beginning. As Caleb reached for his backpack, Ethan noticed a small tattoo on his wrist, a semicolon. Simple but bold. "What's that mean?" he asked. Caleb glanced at it, his expression unreadable. "It's for survival. For choosing to keep going." Ethan's heart sank. He didn't ask for details, but he didn't need to. The tattoo was a reminder of what Caleb had endured and what Ethan had failed to protect him from. "I've got to go," Caleb said, standing. "Haven's got a meeting tonight." "Can we do this again?" Ethan asked, his voice almost a plea. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe. I'll text you." As Caleb walked out, the bell jingling behind him, Ethan felt a spark of hope. It was fragile, but it was there. He paid for the coffees, left a tip for Doris, and stepped into the chilly night. The past was still a ghost, but for the first time in years, Ethan felt ready to face it. The auto shop smelled of oil and metal, a familiar comfort that Ethan clung to as he worked on a rusted Ford the next morning. But his mind wasn't on the engine. It was on Caleb, his brother's guarded eyes, the semicolon tattoo, the weight of their shared history. Last night's conversation had left Ethan restless, his sleep fractured by memories of 2009. He saw Caleb's face, pale and terrified, as their father dragged him to the church's basement. Ethan had stood by, believing it was for Caleb's own good. Now, the shame of it gnawed at him, a wound that refused to heal. His coworker, Javier, noticed his distraction. "You okay, man? You've been staring at that bolt for 10 minutes. Ethan forced a smile. "Yeah, just family stuff." Javier nodded, not pressing. Ethan liked that about him. Javier was a listener, not a talker. But today, Ethan wished he could spill it all, confess the guilt that clung to him like grease. After work, Ethan drove to the edge of town, where Haven's community center stood. It was a squat brick building, its windows covered in colorful posters about acceptance and pride. Caleb had mentioned a meeting, and though Ethan hadn't been invited, he needed to see what Caleb's life was now. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the chatter of teenagers and the smell of cheap pizza. Ethan lingered by the door, feeling out of place. Caleb was at the front, laughing with a group of kids, his energy infectious. Ethan watched, a mix of pride and pain swelling in his chest. This was Caleb's world now, a world Ethan had no part in. One of the kids, A girl with bright purple hair noticed him. "You here for the meeting?" she asked, her tone curious but wary. No," Ethan said, rubbing his neck. "Just visiting." Caleb looked up, his smile fading slightly when he saw Ethan. He excused himself and walked over, his expression guarded. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see what you do," Ethan said honestly. "I didn't mean to intrude." Caleb studied him, then nodded. "Stay if you want. Just don't make it weird." Ethan sat in the back, watching as Caleb led the group in a discussion about identity and resilience. The kids shared stories, some heartbreaking, others hopeful, and Caleb listened with a patience Ethan envied. He saw his brother in a new light, strong, compassionate, a beacon for kids who'd been cast out. After the meeting, Caleb approached him. "So, what did you think?" "You're good with them," Ethan said. "They trust you." "They have to," Caleb said, his voice tinged with sadness. "Most of them don't have anyone else." Ethan wanted to say something meaningful, but the words felt inadequate. Instead, he asked, "Can I help?" "With Haven? I mean, I don't know much, but I want to try." Caleb's eyes narrowed, searching for sincerity. "Why?" "Because I owe you," Ethan said, his voice raw. "And because I want to know you again." Caleb didn't respond right away. He looked back at the kids, who were stacking chairs and joking around. "We need someone to fix the van," he said finally. "It's been acting up." "You're a mechanic, right?" Ethan nodded, a small smile breaking through. "Yeah, I can do that." As they walked to the parking lot, Caleb's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face softening. "That's Leo," he said, almost to himself. "Leo?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his tone light. "My boyfriend," Caleb said, a hint of pride in his voice. "He's meeting me here." Ethan's heart stuttered. He hadn't known Caleb was seeing someone, and the realization hit him hard, not because of who Leo was, but because it was another piece of Caleb's life he'd missed. Leo arrived minutes later, a tall man in his mid-20s with warm brown eyes and a quiet confidence. He greeted Caleb with a quick kiss, then turned to Ethan, offering a handshake. "You must be the brother," he said, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. "Yeah," Ethan said, shaking his hand. "Ethan." The three of them stood in awkward silence until Caleb said, "Leo's a counselor at Haven. He's the one who keeps me sane." Leo laughed, nudging Caleb. "Someone's got to." Ethan watched them, a pang of envy mixing with his guilt. Caleb had built a Lifia good one despite everything, and Ethan wanted to be part of it, even if he didn't deserve to. As they parted ways, Caleb handed Ethan a key to the van. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Don't be late." Ethan gripped the key, a lifeline to something he hadn't dared hope for. "I won't." The van was a Mesa 90s Dodge with a rattling engine and a transmission that groaned like it was on its last legs. Ethan spent the next morning under its hood, the familiar rhythm of work calming his nerves. Caleb stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "You sure you know what you're doing?" Caleb asked, half teasing. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, grinning despite himself. "I've fixed worse. Give me a couple hours." Caleb nodded, then sat on a nearby crate, scrolling through his phone. The community center's parking lot was quiet, the morning sun casting long shadows. Ethan stole glances at his brother, searching for traces of the boy he'd known. Caleb's ease, His quiet confidence was new, but the way he chewed his lip when deep in thought was achingly familiar. You and Leo seem solid, Ethan said, breaking the silence. Caleb looked up, surprised. Yeah. He's good for me. How'd you meet? Ethan asked, keeping his tone casual as he tightened a bolt. At a rally in Chicago, Caleb said, a small smile tugging at his lips. He was giving a speech about mental health for queer youth. I was a mess back then, still figuring myself out. He saw something in me, I guess. Ethan nodded, focusing on the engine to hide the ache in his chest. He wanted to know everything every moment he'd missed, but he didn't know how to ask without reopening old wounds. What about you? Caleb asked suddenly. You got someone? Ethan paused, caught off guard. Nah. Haven't had time. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Or you're just dodging. Ethan chuckled, but it felt hollow. The truth was, he'd kept people at arm's length since Caleb left. Relationships required trust, and Ethan didn't trust himself not to hurt someone again. The conversation lulled, and Ethan worked in silence, the van's engine slowly coming back to life. When he finally closed the hood, Caleb stood, inspecting the van with a nod. Not bad. High praise, Ethan said, wiping his hands on a rag. Caleb smirked, but his expression turned serious. Why are you doing this, Ethan? Really? Ethan met his gaze, the weight of the question pressing down. I told you. I want to make things right. And what does that mean? Caleb pressed. You think fixing a van or saying sorry erases what happened? No, Ethan said, his voice low. But it's a start. I don't expect you to trust me yet. I need you to know I'm trying. Caleb's eyes softened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he tossed Ethan a water bottle. Don't dehydrate. Ethan caught it, a small gesture that felt like a bridge. They spent the rest of the morning testing the van, driving it around the block. Caleb laughed when it sputtered, and Ethan felt a spark of hope maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something. That evening, Ethan went to the diner alone, the same booth where they'd met. He pulled out Caleb's letter, rereading the lines that had haunted him. I'm not here to forgive you yet, but I'm here. The words were a challenge, a chance. His phone buzzed a text from Caleb. Van's running great. Thanks. Ethan stared at the screen, a warmth spreading through him. He typed back, anytime. But as he sat there, the past crept in again. He remembered the church, the cold basement, the therapist who'd promised to fix Caleb. Ethan had stood outside the door, hearing his brother's sobs, telling himself it was necessary. The memory made him sick. He left the diner and drove to the old church, now abandoned, its steeple sagging under years of neglect. He hadn't been back since their father's funeral. Standing in the empty parking lot, he felt the weight of his choices. He'd been complicit, too afraid to question, too eager to please. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Caleb. Haven's having a fundraiser tomorrow. You in? Ethan's heart lifted. It was small, but it was an invitation. He typed back, I'm in. As he drove home, the stars bright above the quiet town, Ethan felt a resolve settle in. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for the future for Caleb, for the kids at Haven, for the brother he'd failed but wouldn't fail again. The fundraiser was alive with color and noise. The community center transformed with rainbow flags and strings of lights. Ethan arrived early, his nerves jangling as he helped set up tables. Caleb was everywhere directing volunteers, joking with kids, his energy a magnet for everyone around him. Ethan watched, marveling at how his brother had become a leader, a light for others. Leo approached, carrying a box of flyers. "You're sticking around, huh?" he said, his tone friendly but probing. "Trying to," Ethan replied, stacking chairs. "Caleb's doing something important here." Leo nodded, his gaze steady. "He is. Just don't hurt him again." The words hit hard, but Ethan respected the protectiveness. "I won't," he said, hoping he could keep that promise. As the event began, Ethan stayed in the background, watching Caleb and Leo work the crowd. The kids from Haven performed a spoken-word piece, a drag act, a song that had everyone cheering. Ethan felt a pang of pride mixed with regret. This was the world Caleb had built without him, a world where he belonged. During a break, Caleb found Ethan by the refreshment table. "You're quiet tonight," he said, grabbing a cookie. "Just taking it in," Ethan said. "This place, it's incredible." Caleb's expression softened. "Yeah. It's home." The word stung. Home had once been their family's house, the church, the town. But for Caleb, it had become a prison. Ethan wanted to ask how he'd survived, how he'd found this strength, but the questions felt too heavy for the moment. Instead, Caleb spoke first. "I saw you at the church last night." Ethan froze, caught off guard. "You were there." "I drive by sometimes," Caleb admitted, his voice low. "To remind myself I'm not that kid anymore." "What were you doing there?" Ethan hesitated, then told the truth. "Facing ghosts. I needed to see it, to remember what I did." Caleb's eyes searched his, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw understanding. But then Caleb said, "You don't get to just visit the past and feel bad. You have to do something about it." "I'm trying," Ethan said, his voice raw. "I'm here, aren't I?" Caleb nodded, but his expression was guarded. "Yeah, you are." The rest of the night passed in a blur of music and laughter, but Ethan couldn't shake Caleb's words. As he helped clean up, a teenage boy approached him, nervous. "You're Caleb's brother, right?" "Yeah," Ethan said, surprised. "What's your name?" "Tyler," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Caleb said you fixed the van. I wanted to say thanks. It's how we get to meetings." Ethan's throat tightened. "No problem, Tyler. Happy to help." Tyler smiled, shy but genuine, and Ethan felt a spark of purpose. This was what Caleb meant, doing something, not just feeling sorry. As the night ended, Caleb walked Ethan to his truck. "You did good tonight," Caleb said, almost grudgingly. "Thanks," Ethan said, pausing. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb nodded, wary. "What was it like after you left?" Caleb's face darkened, and for a moment, Ethan thought he'd pushed too far. But then Caleb spoke, his voice steady but heavy. "It was hell at first. Sleeping in alleys, stealing food. I thought about ending it more than once. But then I found people, strangers who cared more than my own family. They showed me I wasn't broken." Ethan's eyes burned, but he held Caleb's gaze. "I'm so sorry, Caleb. I should have been there." "Yeah, you should have," Caleb said, but his voice wasn't cruel. "But you're here now. That's something." As Ethan drove home, Tyler's shy smile and Caleb's words stayed with him. He wasn't forgiven. Not yet. But he was starting to see a path forward, one step. One van. One conversation at a time. Weeks passed, and Ethan became a quiet fixture at Haven, fixing leaks, hauling supplies, anything to keep his hands busy and his brother close. Caleb remained guarded, but there were moments shared laughs over a broken chair. A nod of approval when Ethan finished a task that felt like progress. One evening, as they painted a mural in the community center, Caleb opened up. "You remember that summer we built a treehouse?" he asked, his brush pausing mid-stroke. Ethan smiled, the memory vivid. "Yeah. You insisted on a rope ladder. Nearly broke your neck climbing it." Caleb chuckled, but his eyes were distant. "That was the last time I felt like you were on my side." The words cut deep, and Ethan set down his brush. "I never stopped being your brother, Caleb. I lost my way." Caleb nodded, his expression unreadable. "I know, but it's hard to forget." Ethan wanted to say more, but Leo called Caleb over, ending the moment. As Ethan watched them together, he felt a mix of gratitude and envy. Leo was Caleb's anchor, the one who'd been there when Ethan hadn't. Later, at the diner, Ethan met Javier for a beer. He hadn't planned to talk, but the words spilled out about Caleb, the conversion therapy, the guilt that kept him awake. Javier listened, his face calm but serious. "You can't change what you did," Javier said finally. "But you're showing up now. That's more than some people do." Ethan nodded, but the weight didn't lift. He wanted absolution, but he knew it wasn't that simple. The next day, Caleb invited Ethan to a Haven workshop on family reconciliation. Ethan hesitated sitting in a room full of strangers. Talking about feelings wasn't his thing. But Caleb's quiet, it'd mean a lot, convinced him. The workshop was raw, emotional. Kids shared stories of rejection. Parents shared regrets. Ethan listened, his heart pounding, as a mother tearfully apologized to her son for sending him to a camp like the one Caleb had endured. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he froze, the room's eyes heavy on him. "I hurt my brother," he said finally, his voice shaking. "I thought I was helping him, but I was wrong. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm trying." Caleb's eyes met his, and for the first time, Ethan saw something like forgiveness there. It wasn't complete, but it was a start. After the workshop, Caleb pulled him aside. "That was brave," he said quietly. "I didn't expect you to do that." "I meant it," Ethan said. "I'm not giving up on us." Caleb nodded, a small smile breaking through. "Good. Because I'm not either." That night, Ethan lay awake, replaying the day. He thought of the treehouse, the rope ladder, the boy Caleb had been. He thought of the man he was now, strong and whole despite everything. And for the first time, Ethan believed they could find their way back to each other, not as they were, but as something new. Winter settled over Millfield, blanketing the town in snow and silence. Ethan and Caleb fell into a rhythm: weekly coffees at the diner, late nights at Haven, small steps toward rebuilding trust. But the past was never far, lurking in every quiet moment. One evening, Caleb invited Ethan to his apartment, a small loft above a bookstore. It was cluttered but warm, filled with books, art, and photos of Caleb and Leo. Ethan noticed a picture of their old family home, tucked on a shelf like an afterthought. "You kept this?" Ethan asked, holding up the frame. Caleb shrugged. "It's not about the house. It's about us before everything went wrong." Ethan studied the photo, his younger self smiling beside a gap-toothed Caleb. He wanted to ask why Caleb held on to it, but the answer was in his brother's eyes: hope. Even after everything. They cooked dinner spaghetti, Caleb's favorite, and talked about nothing important. It felt normal, almost like the old days. But as they washed dishes, Caleb's mood shifted. I got a call from Mom today, he said, his voice tight. Ethan froze. Their mother, Ellen, had been a ghost since their father's death, living in Florida, distant and silent. What did she say? She wants to see me, Caleb said, drawing a plate with more force than necessary. Said she's been thinking about things. Ethan's stomach churned. Ellen had never stopped their father's crusade, never stood up for Caleb. You gonna go? I don't know, Caleb admitted. Part of me wants to hear her out. Part of me wants to tell her to go to hell. Ethan understood both impulses. He'd cut contact with their mother years ago, unable to face her complicity. What does Leo think? He says I should go, Caleb said, a small smile breaking through. He's always the optimist. Ethan nodded, wishing he could offer the same clarity. Whatever you decide, I'm here. Caleb looked at him, surprised. You mean that? Yeah, Ethan said, his voice steady. I'm not going anywhere. The next week, Caleb decided to meet their mother. He asked Ethan to come along, and though the idea made Ethan's skin crawl, he agreed. They drove to a cafe in Columbus, where Ellen waited, her hair grayer, her face lined with regret. Caleb, she said, standing as they approached. Her eyes flicked to Ethan, uncertain. Ethan. Mom, Caleb said, his voice flat. The conversation was stilted, full of apologies from Ellen that felt too late. She spoke of guilt, of missing them, but Caleb's expression remained guarded. Ethan stayed quiet, his own anger simmering. I didn't know how to stop him, Ellen said, tears in her eyes. Your father, he was so certain. You didn't try? Caleb said, his voice cold. You let him send me away. Ellen flinched, and Ethan felt a pang of pity, but he didn't speak. This was Caleb's moment. I'm trying now, Ellen said, her voice breaking. I want to be part of your life. Caleb's jaw tightened, and he looked at Ethan, searching for something. Ethan reached out, squeezing his shoulder. It's your call, he said softly. Caleb nodded, then turned to Ellen. I need time. I'm not saying no, but I'm not ready. Ellen nodded, tears falling. I'll wait. As they drove back to Millfield, Caleb was quiet, but Ethan felt a shift. They were in this together now, brothers against the weight of their past. Spring came to Millfield, the snow melting into green fields and blooming trees. Ethan and Caleb's relationship grew stronger, built on small moment-shared meals, late-night talks, volunteering at Haven. The ghosts of 2009 still lingered, but they were softer now, less sharp. One afternoon, Caleb invited Ethan to a pride event Haven was hosting. The community center was a riot of color, with music and laughter spilling into the street. Ethan helped set up, his hands steady but his heart racing. This was Caleb's world, and Ethan was still learning to navigate it. As the event began, Caleb took the stage, his voice clear and strong. This is for everyone who's ever been told they're not enough, he said, his eyes finding Ethan's in the crowd. You are enough. And you are loved. The crowd cheered, and Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. He thought of the boy in the basement, the brother he'd failed, and the man standing before him now, unbroken and proud. After the speech, Caleb found Ethan by a food truck. You okay? He asked, his tone teasing but warm. Yeah, Ethan said, his voice thick. Just proud of you. Caleb smiled, real and unguarded. Thanks. Means a lot. They walked through the event, talking about nothing and everything. Ethan noticed how people gravitated to Caleb kids. Volunteers. Even strangers. He was a light, and Ethan felt honored to be near it. As the sun set, Caleb pulled Ethan aside. "I've been thinking about Mom," he said. "I'm not ready to forgive her, but I'm going to write her. Maybe start there." Ethan nodded, his heart full. "That's a good start." "And you," Caleb said, his voice softening. "I don't hate you anymore. I don't know if I ever really did." Ethan's breath caught. "I don't deserve that, but I'm grateful." Caleb shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "You're my brother. We're stuck with each other." They laughed, the sound light and free. As the Pride event wound down, Ethan looked at the crowd, kids dancing, couples holding hands, a community built on love and resilience. He thought of the church, the basement, the pain they'd left behind. It would always be part of their story, but it wasn't the end. Ethan and Caleb stood together, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The past was a scar, but it was healing. And in its place, something new was growing, something worth fighting for.